because part of what you demand from people, let's say, in terms of sheer civility, is that they act towards you as if you're the locus of voluntary choice in a world of potential. And you upbraid each other for that as well. If you have children and parents, your parents will say to you, if you're fortunate, you're not living up to your potential, which is actually a compliment in a sense, even though it's also a judgment. And the compliment is, I know perfectly well that you could be more than you are. And you'll hang your head if you have any sense, and you'll think, like you think in relationship to your own conscience, that yes, I have a lot of potential that I'm not fully realizing, and that actually constitutes a transgression against the good. And I don't think I've ever met anyone who doesn't believe that. If you have a reasonable conversation with them, it just seems self-evident. I mean, maybe now and then you meet someone who's narcissistically self-satisfied, but then they're narcissistic, and that's not good. That as a medium to long-term strategy, that's a catastrophe. That ends in disaster. You know, it's a short-term, it protects people, but long-term, it's not good in the least. And of course, other people don't appreciate it as well. Rule 11 is don't bother children when they're skateboarding. And that's actually a discussion of courage, of encouragement, more specifically, because I've been trying to understand, for example, what role parents play in the lives of their children. And I would say this is a role that is of fundamental importance, as well as attempting to guide your children so that they act in a socially desirable manner, so that the world opens itself up to them. You also want to encourage them, which is not the same as sheltering them. It's not the same at all. And to encourage someone is to say something like, or to act out something like, look, kid, the world's already difficult, because the world isn't easy for children any more than it's easy for adults. The difficulties they're not the same. They're child-sized difficulties, but they're still difficulties. The world is a very hard place, and it's a bitter place in many ways. And it's not only a hard and bitter place, it's also touched with betrayal and malevolence. And that's the fundamental bottom line. But there's something in you that is capable of taking that full on and transcending it. And that's encouragement. You say, well, as difficult as things are, you're up to the challenge. And to interfere with children when they're skateboarding, for example, when they're doing, let's say, inadvisably dangerous things, which kids of course do if they're skateboarding, to interfere with that is to interfere with the child's willingness to voluntarily expose themselves to the risks that they need to expose themselves to in order to develop the sort of competence that allows them to thrive in a world they cannot be sheltered from. And so to interfere with children when they're taking necessary risks is not love or empathy, but cowardice on the part of parents. And it's deeply damaging to children. And I can tell you, as a clinical psychologist, I've never had a client come to my office in all the hundreds of encounters I've had with people in my office. I've never had a client say, my parents made me too independent. Right, that hasn't happened once. Right, now, my parents made me too dependent, or I conspired with my parents to perpetuate my dependence. That happened all the time. So there's a rule of thumb, which I think is a good one, which I believe is often applied in nursing homes by people who work in nursing homes, which is of course a very difficult job. And the rule is, do not do anything for anyone they can do for themselves. And the reason for that is that it's a form of theft, right? You don't, first of all, if you do something for someone and it facilitates their movement forward, then they moved forward because you helped them, which is something I was very careful about as a therapist. I don't want to give my clients advice. First, it might fail, in which case they are going to pay for my advice. And second, if it succeeds, then I get to be the successful one. And I don't want to steal the success from my clients. That's a bad idea. I want to help them figure out what it is that they should aim at, and then help plot out a strategy for attaining that. But I want to ensure that it's their destiny, not something I'm imposing. And of course the imposition of that sort of thing is the hallmark of a bad, I would say, therapeutic relationship, but also a bad relationship, period. Right? So one of the things you want to do with your partners, your spouse, say your husband or wife, and also with your children, is to listen to them so that you can figure out what their problems are and figure out with them, because they're going to figure that out by communicating, and then perhaps aid them in the development of a strategy. But you have to ensure very carefully that you're not imposing your own structure in a manner that's going to steal from them what's rightfully theirs. So rule 11 is an injunction to courage as the fundamental, because you could say, well, what's the antidote to the catastrophe of life? And one answer might be safety. It's like, well, you know, look, everyone's sensible enough to know that a certain amount of provision for safety is worthwhile. You should probably wear your seatbelts when you're driving around in your car, because why take foolhardy risks? But given that there is no security in life in the final analysis, then encouragement is a much better medication than sheltering. And so, and that's I think in keeping with the idea that what life is essentially is not a place to attain happiness or even to aim for happiness, even though you should be grateful if some comes along now and then, but a call to something like adventure. And I think that's the proper way of conceptualizing it. Certainly, if you go watch a story, a movie, you read a book, something like that, if you encounter a narrative that's gripping, whether it's a romance or a classic adventure story, then the element of it that's gripping is the adventure. And so to portray life as an adventure in romance and in the world is the proper way to portray it. And the way that you facilitate the adventure is through encouragement. I had a client once, I really liked him. He was a good guy, he was a smart guy, good-looking young guy, had everything going for him, you know. He was a good musician, he was a talented athlete, but he hadn't been encouraged, I wouldn't say. He told me about his relationship with his girlfriend. He said his girlfriend wanted to go biking around southern Ontario. She was about 19 or 20, and he thought he might join her. And when she went and talked to her parents, they made every provision possible to help her prepare for the journey, to make sure her bike was in good shape, to make sure she had the right equipment, to help her plot out a route. And when he went and talked to his parents, all they did was worry that he was going to get hurt. And like, he might get hurt, because people get hurt. But they didn't understand that they were choosing between the hurt that he might encounter by going out in the world and having an adventure, let's say with his girlfriend, or the hurt that he would encounter by staying at home, cowering in his basement under the protection of his over-loving parents, while his girlfriend ventured bravely into the world. You think, well, which of those two things is most likely to be damaging? And the answer to that is, well, his parents wouldn't worry as much as if he was in the basement. And that's the wrong worry even, because they should worry more, not less. So in rule 12 is pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. And it's oddly enough, a meditation on fragility. It's a discussion of what you do when you don't know what to do, and that's really when things have gone badly for you, when you face a terrible tragedy in your own personal life or in your familial life, or perhaps even in the life of your community, when things come crowding in at you too quickly. In the case of a death in the family, or a terrible illness, or the collapse of a dream, or any of the things that can flip your world upside down, is how do you cope with that? And that chapter contains discussion of the necessity of narrowing your time frame, you know, because sometimes the right way to look at the world is across years, and sometimes it's across months, and when things are more out of control, perhaps it's across days, and when things are really, when you're really up against the wall, it's across hours or even minutes. And during those minutes, then you concentrate on doing as well as you can with what's right in front of you for the longest unit of time that you can tolerate conceptualizing. Maybe that's what you do at someone's deathbed, and while you're doing that and suffering away madly, then you also take the time to appreciate everything you can that manifests itself, that allows itself to be appreciated. And so that's the metaphor of the cat, I suppose. And so that's the 12 rules. And I'll return to rule 1, which is stand up straight with your shoulders back, and I'm going to use it as a platform for laying out the abstractions that I talked to at the beginning of the